Bradbury. It was Bradbury.
Oh.
Yeah.
So Scott, you're set?
Yep, we're live. Well, there you go.
And we are live. All righty. Good to go? Okay, so we'll call this work session, even though it doesn't look like a work session, because we're in here. Call this work session to order, and we'll start out with Peter Pastorelli and Damian Farwell to talk about potential changes to City Hall.
Thank you, Mayor and Board. I'm Peter Pastorelli, the Public Works Director.
Hi, Damian Farwell, Fleet and Facility Supervisor.
So this afternoon, we were going to give you a brief update on our City Hall renovation project. Also wanted to make sure that we've got full confirmation on the direction that we're headed before we get ready to spend a lot of money. As you know, the SAFE program, our SAFE program staffing requirements has put a sort of a burden on our facility space, our utilization, and we have a need for additional employee space. Right now, at the Johnson Creek facility, there's a lot of people up front in the community development room, and they're quickly running out of space. Actually, one of the engineering technicians has actually temporarily been located into one of our fleet office spaces that we have available, so she's using that. So we're running out of space. We recognize this early on during the budgeting process, and we put in some funding into the budget and started to put together a project to provide some additional space here at City Hall, utilizing the garage bay downstairs. So we've got budgeted in our CIP about $370,000 for that portion of the project, and an additional $50,000 for cubicle upgrades and furniture upgrades to use upstairs as well. During this process, we actually worked with a structural engineering firm, Peterson Structural, to take a look at the City Hall for a seismic assessment to make sure that there weren't any unforeseen issues as we started to work on this project. They did identify a couple non-structural deficiencies in the garage bay that we'll have to address as we renovate that space, and that basically includes taking care of some of the fire suppression pipe hanging bracing that's there. We'll need to do some work on there, and also provide some additional supports for the light fixtures that are hanging in that facility. In addition to that, as we build out that space, I think there's some additional sheathing, plywood sheathing that'll go on the walls to provide some additional support as well. Is there anything on that piece at all? So the project itself really involves the relocation of the council chambers where we're sitting tonight or this afternoon in our conference room downstairs to the garage bay, and then repurposing the existing space to office space. So Damian's been working with Di Loretto Architecture to put together a project, and they're going to provide us with a pre-designed schematic, some design development, and then the preliminary contract pricing and construction documents. So right now we're just really in the final stages of getting that contract put together and signed. We've got some insurance issues that we're working with them to finalize. And then as we look at the space, we've broken it down into really three phases. The first phase is taking care of the conference room upstairs and providing 4 to 6 cubes in that space for engineering staff to work there. This is a possible configuration. I think this afternoon, Damian's worked with with Chuck to confirm what that space is really going to look like. And we're working with Bainbridge, an interior design firm, to help us design that space and put together the cubes and use that space.
So that design is 4 cubes.
That one's 4 cubes. That shows 4 cubes.
Plus a conference.
Plus a small mini conference space. And that may be permanent or it may be adjusted later on. But since we're using the cubes, we'll have that opportunity to make adjustments as we need it. So that's really the first phase, getting that space built out and provide the engineering staff some room.
What's the red overlay in the top? I can't.
It's highlighting a desk portion. It's just a detail that was commented that they wanted it larger, and he scaled it up and circled it in red.
Okay.
Is that pretty accurate of what it's going to look like now?
So I just got an email as I walked out the door from Chuck approving a fit that was after this one that is more furniture style and less cube style. So the workspace facing the windows would not have a large back to it blocking the window. It would look a little more open, and it really is furniture rather than cubes. It is generally representative, the sort of 2 cubes in the middle. I think they're facing slightly differently. I think one of them faces the wall, but the conference table is in the same spot.
So would the dividing line with the conference room or the conference table, would that cube be full to the height of the ceiling because you'd need some privacy in the conference room?
Absolutely. And in going from cubes to sort of furniture style, I brought that up with the interior designer who said actually the cubes don't provide much either. So what he suggested was that we solve it a different way, either with like a large rolling bulletin board style or whiteboard style or something like that.
As the barrier?
As the barrier, yeah.
In the office, the mayor's office, as we call it, that will be staff office under the name.
Yeah, so we've talked to the mayor about that space, and for the next few months, what we'll do is he will work with us in we have that little conference room right by Christina's desk and Kelly's room. So he'll come in and we'll make sure that we have space for meetings there, and he'll have priority in that space. And then we really want to have a chance to do the needs analysis before we make any final decisions about where anybody's going to be, just to make sure that it really fits the best it can for the entire City Hall space. So we will be replacing that space in this construction. It's really a question of where.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, so that ultimate use of how we use that space is going to be sorted out when we finalize that space, need space.
Is there also another conference room like downstairs somewhere? Will it be in the garage bay or whatever you call that thing? I mean, I'm thinking of like when PARB meets and some of the other committees that meet here would need more than like
Pond House. So during the interim, the Pond House, we have 2 conference rooms in there. We're scheduling those now. Christina in our office is actually moving everybody who's scheduled into this room into that space to make sure that those meetings go on consistently. We're working with the library to make sure that there's no issues with getting in and out of the building, and that there's a maximum use of that facility. Once the library is done, then we have that entire larger conference room over there.
Oh, and
then when the bay is done, we'll actually have this setup and a work room setup, and so that'll allow us some flexibility for having different discussions in that space as well.
Okay.
And speaking of the garage bay, that's really the next phase of the project that D. Loretto Architecture is going to be assisting us with. So we're looking at using that space, reconstructing it for the council chambers, the formal piece, and then also some separate conference space in there as well. Also, we're looking at doing some work in the main reception area, some upgrades there to make it a little bit more open and friendly as people come to the facility.
I think you should leave the fire pole so whoever the mayor is, they can come to the state of the cities down the fire pole.
call you Santa
has
Claus.
been
Come-
known to come down
I
the
think you're Santa Claus.
Damien has talked about trying to figure out a way to incorporate that into the space. If we can't figure out a way to incorporate it into the space as a historical artifact, we have had a request from the fire district to have the pole given to them because they do keep them and they do use them in their various facilities as a part of their history. In case anybody wanted to know, the fire chief actually used that pole because he was stationed here. So part of it is his own history as well.
So what are we doing, or what are we thinking about doing in that portion especially? I mean, up here is not the issue about sound, outside sound, and sound from other offices and hallways and whatever.
Yeah, so part of that renovation will include insulating the walls. It's pretty cold. It's not very efficient in terms of heating and cooling in there. So we've got to make some improvements on that. So adding that insulation is going to provide an additional sound barrier and help out there as well. I think right now our intent though is to sort of keep that open ceiling that's there that you have there, but we'll need to make some improvements on how the lighting is held up there and the piping as well.
You will want to think about, because I've been because I park my bike in there now. I've go through there a fair amount, and if somebody's just walking across in the city manager's office area, you can hear it.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's what I mean.
So
the sound is
From upstairs as well.
So when I pace for hours on end,
yeah.
It's really
He
annoying
knows
when I'm
it.
trying to park
Sorry.
my bike.
And then the other piece we're looking at here, this is going to have its own separate heating and cooling piece to take care of that.
And so I just discovered when I did the market the other day and was returning the materials that Jason stores there, that there's a bathroom out there. I didn't even know there was a bathroom out there, but is the idea to renovate the bathroom out there or to have the bathroom just be the one inside the building?
Well, we're looking at various different options in terms of accessibility for ADA accessibility. Having a bathroom there's easier than having to put in some sort of lift to get to the bathroom. So we've got to look at those different options as part of that project.
Oh, that's right. Because of the ADA, we'd have to have a different way for people to get to the restroom, which right now would be stairs. I gotcha.
So that's part of the project. We're looking at those different components as well.
Peter, what's the square footage of this room compared to the 14?
I think that was 1,400. I think that this one is closer to 800.
Oh, it's that much bigger?
If I'm
Yeah.
not mistaken.
it was substantial when we were looking at the square footage for the number of people you could fit into the space.
But is that the entire space there? So part of that would be conference, and then where's the media center? That takes up another section of something somewhere.
All that's sort of in the works, but at sort of first blush, one of those rooms next to Jason, I think could function as a media room.
Yeah. And would court be there as well?
Yes.
Then the other question I had, as the counselor that does this all the time,
Yeah.
would there be any thought given
Can you fix that?
how
Yes.
the audience and council views whatever we're looking at on the screen? I thought that when we went to the school
board,
that
they had the
was,
screen
I don't know
down
that
there,
we
yeah.
are in
County
that-
does that
we're in
also.
that, mode
Yeah.
maybe financially, but that was a really nice, well-designed conference room that was workable for all, I thought.
Yeah.
I don't know if anyone else thought that. but-
I didn't.
Yeah, oh,
No, I
yeah,
was impressed.
definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was impressed.
Clackamas County does that also. It's like in the budget hearings, there's a television screen in
below
front
the
of the dais, and then there's screens on the sidewalk.
There are a few audiovisual things along these lines that we've been kind of holding off of because we knew this was coming that we're going to address. And so we'll definitely take into consideration that. And
Yeah.
we could, potentially it could be more televisions. It could be, we'll have two that go downstairs. The one that's in the conference room now has to go with the meeting room. So we'll definitely be evaluating all that stuff.
Okay, thanks.
But it is kind of fun just making you.
Not just me, but the audience is craning their neck.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, you have to sit on
Well, for
one side of the room.
It's the catbird seats, of course.
We set it up.
I wonder how that worked out that way.
So you're not showing us a drawing of this yet? You're not
No,
to that
yeah,
point.
we had a couple, 3 different options before, but it really didn't show the shared council chambers and conference room. It was more strictly office space with a meeting space. So we've evolved from that to have the council chambers and conference room.
And so is the idea that the conference room, that there's actually some kind of separation, or is it just that there's a conference table at the back of the chamber?
Oh, that's a good question.
That's to be determined. There's a couple different options to look at there, but there's certainly you can have a fixed wall partition, or you can have a movable sliding wall, or you can just have the open space there that is available too. So.
Yeah, and I guess I can answer that a little clearer, just because I've talked to enough people that want to be able to use this space in its entirety, that we'll try and figure out a way to make sure that this space can be used in its entirety, but will also allow for us to have 2 meetings if we need to. And I don't know what that looks like yet, but that's been what we've been trying to figure out.
Happy Valley has their dais, and then they have a wall, and then you can go behind, and they have areas for meeting and stuff behind. It's very small, but they use it a lot, I think.
And can they then take down their dais? And can they make the room one big hole?
No, it's not huge for have you been back? I don't know.
Yeah, and actually a lot of the cities have those side sort of meeting spaces, which are great. The school district did when we went over and had dinner over there. So there's a variety of those, but I do think one of the things I've heard from the community and from all of you since I got here was that you need a meeting space where you can really bring the community together. We have to borrow space, and even at that, it's hard to get that borrowed space. So our hope is to get you a space that you can bring more people to and able to engage with them at. The library gives us an opportunity to have meetings over there if we need to. It's not that far away, and that should fit 75 people. When Damien and I were talking, I think we were closer to thinking this one would fit around 115 if we wanted to have them seated. So this is larger than this would fit my all-staff meeting, which I currently have to lease space for when I hold it. It's not that is the size of my whole staff, but that's about how many people are able to make it on a given meeting. So I'm trying to get to the point where I can do more without borrowing.
And then our third phase of the project is really reconfiguring this space where we are right now to allow for more employee space, office space, looking at additional cubes and some walled office space as well. Also going to look at how we use the space throughout the rest of the building.
So the second bullet up there addresses office space and finance. So tell me a little bit more about what that means. Are you going to separate finance, or?
Well, there's one of the employees just has a small cubicle that's
right behind the door.
Right behind the door.
Yep.
Not very user friendly. Just sort of crunched in a small space. So trying to provide more space for the employees here in the building. So.
Yeah. I get that.
And then part of it is also making sure that we have, conference room space up here as well for our needs and staff needs. So, yeah.
And in the second phase, I think it was, isn't the we didn't speak anything about it, but isn't the reception desk going to be reconfigured?
Yes. Yeah.
And so what's the concept there? Getting rid of the glass? Are there security issues?
Well, there isn't an actual designer plan. That particular CIP, as I understand it, has been kicked a few budget cycles. And when I spoke to stakeholders, it was maybe, it was almost a year ago. I should just say we don't have a really refined set of requirements for that space yet. And I think that that design will sort of come with the design for the chambers. And the intent was that we look at a little more holistically instead of take that as a chunk. We said let's wrap it in and make sure that it sort of reflects aesthetically the chambers and isn't completely isolated. But as far as a layout or even bulleted requirements, I don't think we have that completely refined yet.
We have had a conversation with PD, and I don't think that the glass is, from their perspective, required or needed. But they do want to make sure that we're, and the staff is even torn, I think, downstairs as to what they want and what they want that to look like. So as we get closer, we're going to sit down with them and figure that piece out. But there's a lot on the table as an option.
So as part of the plan, too, in that process, to move the office that Jason currently uses, so you have that whole area then to design and plan and how it flows together?
I would say not necessarily. I think that's going to come out of the sort of the space needs assessment, the larger assessment of where everyone sits and how much space they have and who they need to interact with most often.
Okay, yeah.
Certainly part of it will be finding space for Jason's material and equipment and stuff that he has.
Right, yeah, you're going to be, yeah. Okay.
So our schedule, we've really started moving forward with this past month, June and July, and getting contracts put together with the interior designer Bainbridge and the architecture firm DiLoretto. Looking at the beginning of August, start configuring the space in the conference room, shutting that off for conference space and starting to set up the office space for the engineering staff over there. And then looking at the first part of September, early September, having this engineering staff actually moving over there to start using that space. And then it looks like the first part of our first meeting in August, on 7th of August, we'll be holding our city council meeting, first city council meeting over at the public safety building. That's right.
And we're moving, so those are going to be study sessions. They'll still be filmed and we'll still have them live, but we'll move those just for that meeting over to PSB. If you have concerns about that, our current reasoning is so the Planning Commission can function at the same time that you all do. We can have a discussion about how you'd like to handle that and if you want it to be something different.
That's August 14th.
Is it
Not
August
the 7th.
14th? The 7th will be in here, but the 14th will be at PSB.
It is not as accessible by transit, I will say. It's a little tougher to get to, so that's a little bit of a concern that I would just kind of throw out right away. It's my initial gut reaction to that.
We're shooting to have the fire bay, not the old fire bay, garage bay, that construction completed April of May of next year. And start using that space soon after that in June. And then finalizing the project completion with the upstairs where we are here in office space by September of next year.
The only thing that I would add is that we're actually staffing up on engineering. So I don't think you have all received that update, but we actually have hired several people since the budget approval. So we, I believe, are up 3 employees from when we talked to you last. They're wonderful, fantastic people, but we're starting to have to put them in closets. So this move is actually a very big deal for that room in particular. It can't wait any longer.
Yeah.
And then some of the coordination issues and other concerns that exist out there. And I think Ann briefly mentioned, meeting spaces, and, we're looking at the different options, how we schedule our staff meetings and committee meetings and city council study sessions out at the public safety building. So we're looking at all those different options there. The court operations, there's some coordination that we need to do with the court during this part that staff's working on. And then as we bring more staff over here, there's going to be a parking issue that that we're working through and sorting through. Secure bike parking has been something that's come up. We're looking at the different options there on how we can provide secure bike parking for staff, employees. And then some of the accessibility issues in the garage that we have to deal with that we're making sure that we take care of. Those are some of the main issues and concerns that we've got to address. Certainly, if there's anything that you don't think we've missed on, that we're more than willing to take note and make sure that we've captured those things. There's a lot of moving parts here and a lot of moving people. So there may be something that we missed.
I'm not sure it qualifies as something you missed, but just I noticed in the report, and then you mentioned the idea of plywood as a kind of reinforcement to the masonry or whatever. I have read a few articles the last year about some new thing they're doing to reinforce brick buildings for seismic, and it's an actual something they paint on it. It's actually like a coating that you line it with. So you might want to. I read about it maybe last fall, but then I read a few more things earlier this year. So it might be, it sounded like it was an iffy thing last year, but it sounds like more and more places are maybe using it now. So it might be something to check into.
Okay. Sure.
If I can find one of those articles, I'll send it to you.
So this building, it's got a brick facade. It's got more of a structural piece behind wood frame.
Oh, it does?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's not one of the
unreinforced masonry. Oh, okay.
Okay.
But the bricks still do fall down on people when the earthquake happens, so it is still a problem.
Yeah. Well, and the beauty of that space is because it's unfinished, you can do that on the inside, right, and not affect. A lot of the places don't want to use this because it affects the historic look of the building because you're doing it on the outside. But if you can do it from the inside and not affect the way the building looks, then the historical whatever. Yeah. So since you're going to be putting up siding, insulation and all of that anyway.
Yeah, we'll take a look at that. Are there any other questions?
No. Look forward to seeing the ideas as they progress.
Yeah. Sounds good.
I would just say I'm excited for the opportunities that we have in the Bay, in making it, more public facing.
Yep.
As this committee and commission and maybe less, but the court, being right in the front of City Hall and maintaining the doors, I think that really does make it a much more welcoming space and open to many more people. With just how many people will actually fit in there is a great opportunity. And I also just want to thank everybody for being flexible. We'd have to go out to the voters to get enough money to build a new building. So short of that, I just think, I'm glad that we're in a community where, we're looking first to maximize the use of the space that we've got. So.
Yeah, and I think there are some, and it could be interesting for public events too. It could be a much more useful space for public events than it has been. So
I would say I think there's probably a good chance that those garage doors are going to be replaced with more energy efficient.
You think?
And sound probably.
I was
going to say
that.
If you're going to insulate the walls and not do that, then that would be a big gap.
I just wanted to make sure that everybody knew that. So. Yeah. Amy, you have anything else you wanted to add? Okay.
Cool.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right. The next we've got Ann, who's not here, and Layla presenting on the library ballot survey.
I have Katie's and Ann if they come up.
Okay. I'll just go really slow.
So have you got a handout for us? No?
Oh, yeah. Why don't I do that one? We have a copy. It's good.
I can sit here over there.
I'll hang out here. Hold on. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Layla Aman, your development manager for the city. Today's agenda item is talking about draft ballot language for the Milwaukee Letting Library. What we're asking you to do today is to review proposed ballot measure language for clarification of the use of existing funds. I just want to provide folks some context. We're well aware of it here, but just for the benefit of the public and just give some background on why we're here today. The project has been, the Milwaukee Letting Library has been approved by Planning Commission, and that occurred on April 10th, 2018. At that meeting, a few issues were raised, both by Planning Commission and citizens relative to stormwater was a concern, as well as the 2016 bond that was raised by a citizen. In terms of the land use process, City Council upheld Planning Commission's decision on the June 5th, and then a final order was issued on the 21st. So it's a fully approved building. But when those issues were brought up, we really took a step back and we took a look at that, and we wanted to confirm our assessment that we were in compliance, and we determined that we needed further clarification. So we went into what we kind of call a dual track process at that time. Really, there are two possible tracks for us to confirm that the building that we've proposed that is approved is within compliance of the 2016 bond measure. So those are a validation proceeding, so we can present our case before a judge. It's an objective third-party assessment of the facts, and it does allow members of the public to be aware and participate in that process as well. And then the other option is really to go back to the ballot and to confirm the use of those 2016 GO bonds for new construction. We initiated the validation proceeding because we firmly believe that that building is in compliance, and that it is the best option in terms of the public benefit and the safety that it presents and the value, quite frankly. So those were major considerations for us as well. We also went forward with a validation proceeding, again, because it is transparent and it's an open process, but we felt that at that time that we would have a more expeditious process, and that's really important for us in the context of where we are in the construction timeline. We have hit 50% construction documents. We are in the phasing of in the process right now of getting pricing, so we'll be bringing that back to you at a special meeting on the 31st. But in order to really keep the project as best we could on track, the validation proceedings seemed like the most timely way to do that. And again, it was transparent and public and open. But at the same time, we anticipated that there's a lot of unknowns with that process. We don't have certainty around a court date. We do now, but at the time we didn't. And so we were always looking at what would it take to get us to a ballot. Fundamentally, I think as a city, we agree we need to confirm that language, and we wanted to ensure that we had the ability to get on the November ballot. So that's why we're talking to you tonight. Just to give you a sense of where we are in terms of both of these timelines, I thought it'd be helpful to just sort of take a step back and see where we started this validation process. So on April 23rd, you'll recall we held a special city council session with the library board, the foundation, and we described the issue at that time and our proposed approach and had a conversation with the public about that. On May 11th, we commenced our validation proceedings, so we filed with the court on that date, and we were assigned a judge on June 6th. On June 18th, there was an answer in opposition filed, so a private citizen, Mr. Tom Madden, filed an answer in opposition to us and worked with our legal counsel to establish a trial date. And that trial date is now set for August 6th, 2018. So from our perspective, this is the time. So today, if we look at July 17th, in order for us to hit and prepare for, quite frankly, putting language on a November ballot, we need to be prepared to refer that to the voters on August 14th. We may get a decision on August 6th, we may not. And so we want to be prepared to be able to hit the ground running no matter what that time frame looks like. So what we're proposing today is draft ballot language, and we would like you to review that. The next steps in the process are that we will go to the task force on July 30th, and we'll be presenting a range of information to them that we will also be bringing to you on the 31st. So both looking at the cost estimate, we've done an evaluation of the cistern option to address the stormwater, so we'll talk with you about that. And then we will we will have initial polling results by the 30th. So we'll be able to have a conversation with the task force and with you as well on the 30th about those outcomes.
And just to clarify, on the polling results, what we're talking about is actually looking at this ballot language and making sure that it does exactly what we want it to do in terms of telling the story of what we're trying to achieve to the public in a transparent way. So this isn't a typical thing where you're going out and asking a bunch of questions about what motivates people the most. It really is, are we being clear enough with the community that they're hearing what we're trying to say?
Thanks for the clarification. Sure. That's right. And we will discuss that with you on the 31st. We'll revise the ballot language, bring that back to you on August 7th, and then we would expect, if we don't have a decision by August 14th, that we would refer that, we would present a resolution to you to consider to refer that measure to the November ballot. And we have to file that by the 15th. So that's why we're here today. With that, I think we can walk through the language. I can pass it over to Tim, or I can be available to answer any questions.
I have two thoughts about it, just right off the bang. One, I would spell out GeoBond.
Oh, in the language?
In the language.
In the...
As opposed to calling it as opposed to calling it GeoBond, calling it general obligation bond.
Oh. Does that change the word count?
Well, if you change it below instead of, so you can say general obligation bonds above in the question, and then in the summary it says go bond.
Right. Some place or another, I think it needs to.
It should just be reversed, because it does say general obligation in the summary.
It does.
So I would reverse that, so then it's more clear.
And we have enough words.
I'd even go one step further and say if the caption can say library bonds, I think the question should say library bonds unless there's, because general obligation, people don't get that.
Yeah.
So,
Oh, I see.
But when I see library bonds, I get it.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that would be fine too.
You can't do that. I would just say library bonds in both question and caption. You can talk general obligation when you get to the summary. You got a little more time to explain, but it just doesn't resonate with people.
Yep.
That's a good point.
And I also was wondering, I haven't counted them, but I know these are the requirements on the word word caps, but
Is that where we are?
What are they? When we actually count them out, do we have room?
You have room.
Yes.
You don't on the caption. You have 2 on the question, and you have several on the summary. Originally, when we were looking at this, we had a second paragraph that we've removed.
In the summary?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
So, and then the other thing is the sentence that sort of really is the crux of it, or the crux of why would the city need to do this, is the sentence that says, since then, extensive study of the existing library building has led the city to consider the option of removing the library and rebuilding it. I feel like that wants to be stronger or more specific or more literal. I don't know. It feels vague, and when it feels vague to the electorate, they think we're trying to sneak something past them.
So you, Tim.
Well, plus in all of our, in the public meetings that you've just referenced, we've been pretty honest that we're not actually looking at, that our plans now are for a rebuild. And so I consider the option of removing and rebuilding is not what we're really asking. We're saying we've determined that's the best course for the city.
Yeah, I agree that that's what you've decided and where we're landing. I think the balance we're trying to strike here is to write a sentence that would also allow you, if a new building were not possible, to do something that is a remodel. So you want to ride both horses. But I think the feedback is good. We may not craft the exact language here, but the idea of trying to sharpen up that sentence a little bit. You'll have another crack at this in a future proceeding, but we could try to sharpen that up a bit.
Yeah, it was literally that, if we renovate instead of tear it down and start over, we get a smaller library for the $9.2 million. That's a pretty clear-cut distinction, and I think that needs to be drawn clearly for the voters.
So the one piece that we've been cautious about is making sure that this doesn't become an advocacy piece, because that will get rejected by the state.
Right.
So we'll work with Tim and see what we can come up with. I will also let you know, though, that we are going to be testing this language starting tomorrow. So we're probably going to be working with Tim tonight to come up with some language so that we can get it out the door tomorrow, literally to make sure that we're meeting the timeframes we've outlined in the rest of the document. So as much as you'll get a chance to tweak this before it's on the ballot, if you decide to go that direction, it's going to be limited how much we can. We want to make sure that the language is tied as closely as possible to what we put out to survey is what you want to put on the ballot. So we'll see what we can do tonight. Okay.
I don't know if anyone else has thoughts on this, but
Counselor, your mic. Thank you.
If anyone else has thoughts on this or feels the same, but I would put, if it were me, I think I'd put the no new taxes will be levied as my first sentence.
I thought about that.
Yeah.
I don't, I also wonder about how far into it do people read, and that's a big deal. And it's our last sentence is we're not raising any taxes. But
sounds great.
Others may feel differently on how that.
I agree with you.
I agree.
Yeah.
If it is, if it's not clear, the previously authorized people, if people don't read the caption, if they don't read the question, they should get to that point right away.
Immediately.
In the summary.
Yeah.
And actually, just because it is a tight turnaround, I will probably work with Tim on this during the dinner hour. I'd actually like to have us discuss it at the close of business tonight, to give you a chance to hear what that new language is so that we will have everything approved for tomorrow. Okay.
Cool.
I have one sentence that just reads funny to me, and I just wondered about maybe changing a word. In the center of it somewhere, since then, extensive study of the existing library building has led the city to consider the option of removing the library and rebuilding it. I'm just, the word library in there, just even though that's what it is.
Removing the structure?
Removing the structure or removing the building, but then you say rebuilding, so I don't want to use building, but structure was one of the words that I had put down as a possibility. Instead of library.
Existing structure?
You're just afraid that the words removing the library will...
We're not getting rid of the actual library service. Right.
Yeah, it just...
Oh, I see.
Yeah, that's the sentence that needs work.
I was going to say, even just the option of replacing the current structure. Why removing and rebuilding? Just replacing.
So the one concern that I have is that construction costs are constantly going up. And the longer this takes, the longer that it takes for us to redesign anything or redo anything, the less square footage we get each time.
Right.
So my only caution on that front is that we got into this position by not having open enough language that allowed us the maximum flexibility. I am trying to provide us with as much possible flexibility going into this as possible.
I can see that.
That would have been excellent advice 3 years ago.
Thank you for giving me a job. Anything else? Rather than saying this is over then, I'd like to say we're going to revisit this tonight at the end of the meeting.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Great, thanks. Thanks, Layla.
Yeah, thank you.
That was very well explained.
And we're even ahead of schedule. Look at that.
Yay, that's always
Does
good.
that happen?
That's good, because the next one,
It's going to take forever.
Not necessarily. We've reviewed all these before.
no, we actually didn't. Some of these are brand new.
Well, yeah, more or less.
Oh, yeah, a lot of these are brand new. Some are holdovers, but not that many.
Right.
So, next up, we have housekeeping code amendments, round 2. Sounds like a boxing match. With Denny Egner, our planning director, and Vera Clayus.
I would also be reticent if I didn't declare that or disclose that we were originally calling these room service because they are more work than we have done in the past around general housekeeping.
And Vera named them room service.
So I'm saying this in part, Jess, but also to say that we recognize these are more intensive changes than we have been doing in the past. These are not consistently we're not planning on doing these every year, but we heard there were a number of things you wanted to address, so we packaged them.
Good evening, Vera Clayus, Associate Planner, Denny Egner, Planning Director here. Yes, these are the room service amendments. We'll see what round 3 ends up being called. I'm going to find something in my theme here. As the city manager commented, some of these amendments are still housekeeping kind of code fixes, but some of them do travel a bit into the policy realm as well. And I overheard a couple of the councilors noting that some of these are new from when we were here prior to, and when you open up the code for amendments, things drop in them. So this will just remain open until we actually get to something a bit more. I think folks keep wanting to. Do we still have time?
Until we notice it, which we haven't done yet.
Right. So once we get to that will close the door. But you may still find some new things in there because it's a great opportunity to tweak some things. Recognizing the amount of time we have, there were a couple of items that I wanted to make sure that we covered while we were here. And then certainly, I know that Councilor Beatty had some questions on a couple, and I do have a couple of things on the PowerPoint slides to help illustrate those questions that you had. But I did want to, because it does affect the NMIA code, the proposed code that will be here, back here in August, I wanted to talk about the green building section of the code. Certainly we'll be kind of pulling this. Right now we're creating a new section to be able to reference other code sections to the green building standards. But we have the opportunity to plug that in and have it apply to the NMIA sooner. And then when we do this code amendment package, then we can talk about it with the downtown and the general mixed-use zones. So what we're proposing to do is to create a new code section, and it's in your packet, and it's section 510. So we're creating a new section within 500. It's on work session page 29 and 30 of the staff report packet. And so what we're proposing to do is to have in the other code sections just reference this code section, and this is the section that would establish what those minimum requirements, those green building standards would be in order to achieve the building height bonus as determined within the code section that we're referencing it. What we're proposing is an introductory paragraph to just sort of talk about why we're doing this and the purpose of a green building standard, but then, and also to talk about what criteria, what other sections apply to this, that being the vertical housing development zone. So it does pull that into here as well. We're keeping our existing language, which is talking about certification at any level of an ANSI approved green building rating system, and then proposing to add an additional requirement, which is the Energy Trust of Oregon, the ETO certification, or their program for the Path to Net Zero program. So that a developer, if they were seeking the building height bonus for green buildings, there would be two requirements that they would need to achieve. One is that green building rating system. As an example, the Axle Tree project is proposing a Green Globes certification, but then in addition to that, there would be approval or documentation that they are within the Path to Net Zero program through ETO. We did meet with ETO to kind of talk about what this language talk about and how does a project get there, and I can talk about it a bit. Certainly happy to have those folks come if you have really specific questions about their program. But the idea is to get to both the green building rating standards and the things that get you a green building rating through either Green Globes or LEED or something like that can talk about location of the building, for proximate to transit, stormwater, recycled materials, those kinds of things. But then we get to the Path to Net Zero for energy efficiency for the building, which is something that the green building rating systems don't necessarily require. It doesn't get you there necessarily, and this would get us to that Path to Net Zero idea for energy efficiency for the building itself. So that's the proposal. And I wanted to get some feedback and see where the council was on that, because we'd like to plug this part into the NMIA as part of that building height bonus, and that code amendment comes sooner than this one does.
I also wanted to disclose there's a difference of opinion on staff, and I'm not sure if you said that, so just wanted to make sure it's clear that there are some concerns about cost associated with doing the dual track. And so we've heard that complaint from developers in the past, or I have at least over the course of my career. We are adding a secondary requirement on top of the primary. We looked at coming up with a list of all the programs. You run into the problem of trying to keep those lists up to date. It gets really cumbersome and messy, and you miss some, and some ratings become more stringent, some become less stringent over time. They don't hit the goals that you're trying to do. And so I personally am a little nervous about having a list of programs for that perspective. ETO is a local program, but energy efficiency, as we've looked at, is not always cheap. There are standards that we're asking people to build to, and they are getting a benefit for this standard, so I'm not saying they're not. But I just wanted to make sure you know that those concerns are going to be expressed if we decide to go down this dual track. And so we wanted to also clarify with you if you need that dual track, or if you're okay with one or the other, or how you would recommend us proceeding on the content.
And one of the comments that we did receive was that rather than have it as an and, that it should be an or, and have a developer choose.
Well, if we were going to do an or, then we would need to delete certain standards that are currently in our code, because some of them are just greenwashing. They're not actual green standards.
And then you get back to this point of having to track and having to have an expert on staff of looking at which programs are stronger than others. We also looked at originally about setting a certification level. So like in LEED, you have silver, gold, you have certification silver, gold, and platinum. They actually redo those every couple years so that the standards change. They become harder and harder to achieve over time. Not every program does that. And so as our building code gets more stringent in the state, some of those will lapse as being less stringent, right? They'll become easier to achieve because you're already having these other requirements. And I'm not sure that's what you guys want to do. I think you're trying to push everything forward. But I don't know if we want to revisit this every year. And that was one of our concerns.
And I would add that what we understood from the ETO folks when we met with them was that those green building rating systems, those are national rating systems. They aren't specific to Oregon. So the way one particular program might align or might not align with the Oregon Building Code, we may not be getting what we want because there may be aspects that the Oregon Building Code is actually better than what the rating system. So it gets complicated because it's sort of an average kind of national idea. It's not specific to Oregon. So this idea of being able to, get to the energy efficiency piece, but then also allow for some of those other aspects of those rating systems to be a reasonable.
Well, so if you kind of look at it backwards and you say, okay, they have to do path to net zero. So that the certification process of that is not only not expensive, it puts money into the project. They give you money. And the points toward LEED or towards any of those other certifications that you would get just by doing that project would get you probably past silver into gold on virtually every single one of the other standards. So looking at it from that standpoint, in a way, it's not adding anything. It's just saying energy efficiency is the part of the standard that we actually really care about. I mean, we care about it all, but we really care about the energy efficiency part.
And if you guys want to go down the path of, literally the path of getting the energy efficiency part, you have a local program that is set to your building code that does give you money, but it's stringent. As you know, it is, you are paying more to do more on the efficiency side. The certification isn't a cost there. You would still have the if you tried to do a dual track, let's say you get the points from the energy efficiency side, you're still having to pay all the certification costs of LEED if you were requiring both. And that is costly, having built those buildings. So, the reason I think staff was also talking about this OR scenario is that developers like flexibility to look at what works best for them. Some architects are really great at LEED, but they've never done passive, or they've done passive, but they've never really gotten into ETO's programming, so different people just have different strengths. And there's a little hesitancy to say you have to choose our standard when you come in the door. I will disclose that when I worked for Salt Lake County, I made everybody build to LEED. So I did that. I said, this is the standard in order to get the incentive. So I don't have a lot of ground to stand on, but I do think that you lose flexibility if you choose a single program. But if you were to choose a single program, I think ETO is probably your best program.
Well, and that's just it. It is the one standard in there that you are going to get energy efficiency, straight up. Because they base it on the kind of building it is. So what is it? Is it commercial? Is it office? Is it housing? They base it on the mix, how much of the floor, and then the standard is to build a building that the envelope and the HVAC system are efficient enough that at some point in the future, you would be able to put solar on that roof and you have a net zero building. So it creates an efficient building straight up, whether or not they choose to use solar ever. And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, they track, or their standards track with the, help me out, ICLEI? No, it's not ICLEI.
I think it was the it the 2030?
Architecture 2040.
Yeah.
Standards, which is this ever-increasing standard, and it's an international group, and they're saying, okay, the technology exists to do this good of a building, so we're expecting you to do at least, if the technology exists to do this, we're expecting you to do at least this, and eventually you're going to have to be able to do that.
One other thing I might point out is we haven't talked with developers yet.
Nope.
And we wanted to do that before the hearing. I think we're kind of in a little bit of an awkward situation because we'd like to get this rolled into the NMIA. So there's some urgency to want to figure out what we want to do. But on the other hand, the changes for the downtown program, we haven't even advertised yet, so we haven't held a work session with Planning Commission yet. We haven't figured out exactly what we're doing. So we're a ways off for adopting it for downtown and for central Milwaukee. But we could put off the NMI part 2 if we wanted to take more time to sort it out.
No, it's just...
Not adoption of NMIA, just so we're clear.
All I'm saying is it could be the add-in thing for the NMIA. We could put the framework in place, and then the standard gets added.
Sure.
And you're not agreeing tonight to doing any of these, but we wanted to get a general sense of where you're going, because we do want to have these conversations. And I appreciate Denny bringing it up with the development community to talk about what kind of issues may come up with these topics.
Well, so those of you who were involved in the library force know a little more than the rest of us about Path to Net Zero, and so what is it costing us? What do we think it's costing us on the library project?
I believe that the difference between the building code and Path to Net Zero building was about $346,000.
It was more than that. That was only for one HVAC system. That was only for I think it was the heating system or something. I can get you the number. I don't have it, and we would need to put it into this. But I think it's a fair question, and I think we should present it with the presentation.
And it might not also be a clean answer because of how much money we spend on heating and cooling of that building. So we'd have to sort of take...
Well, but it's the development cost.
Yeah, right. But
it's not the cost against. Yeah, it's clearly an improvement over what we have, but I want to know what it costs.
Well,
just net, to develop 2 new buildings, one that does it and one that doesn't. And
I think you're looking at a pro forma that may or may not be owned by the person building it, right? So in our case, we're going to own it afterwards. We're going to recoup those costs from the savings on the energy. But what I hear you saying is, what is the upfront cost difference? And we'll do a little digging.
And my other question was, is there any, you offered to have somebody come talk to us, and I kind of like that idea, although maybe, is there any reason to have Energy Trust come do a standalone public meeting? Would there be developers or people in town or home builders or anybody else who would be interested in learning about it? So could we sort of hit 2 birds with 1 stone, sort of educate ourselves and offer a public education?
Yeah, they have different programs, one for commercial buildings and other staff for residential. So,
so it wouldn't be the same.
We could do, if we were doing something separate, that would make sense.
Yeah.
We'd probably want to do some specific reach out to the developers then and let them know that so that as many as possible could be in the room.
Sure.
You and also just for a clarification, I wanted to make sure people heard the mayor when he said that this does not include any renewable component. So the ETO program does not have any requirements on having a renewable energy component within the building. It's only for energy efficiency of the building. That will come into play on some of our projects in the future. But in general, just so you know, we're only talking about how you insulate the building, how you put in the windows, how you handle the HVAC system, how you deal with those types of things that make the building use less.
Mm-hmm. Mark, did you say that if they met that Path to Net Zero, that they would almost automatically qualify for the subsection 1?
Well, as Ann pointed out, that's a constantly moving target on every single one of those standards. But yes, Path to Net Zero is stringent enough that the points you would get towards your lead, towards all the other ones, would push you up into, I believe, Path Zero or Path Silver on virtually any of the rating systems.
So as an example on LEED, they have different categories where you qualify for the points. Energy efficiency has a very specific section. You would max out that energy efficiency section. You would still have to qualify for some of the other sections. Okay. But that has, part of what has been the downfall at times of LEED is that you can do that with putting a bike rack. Some of the changes are really expensive, like doing a big water system, and some of the changes are really cheap. And so people were going towards the really cheap ones, which is why they've started to make it more and more stringent for LEED. But that's not the direction that some of these programs are going. Some of them just want people to do more, and so they're willing to give a certification for less.
Okay. And as far as the language that we were using, documentation that confirms participation in a program offering, I'm just wondering what exactly we would be looking for. A piece of paper that they would that they would say, I confirm that you're participating in a program offering? I don't know what that exactly means.
And it's a good question. That was language specific from ETO because it aligns with how they do their work. So they have a 3-part process. There's the design phase, there's the construction documents phase, and then there's the post-construction phase. And they had provided, and I can provide this to the council. Certainly, there's basically a letter, and they said they were willing to develop something kind of specific for us, but basically it's a letter that confirms their participation, that they're at the Path to Net Zero, they're in the program, they've received the funding, or they're the incentives that go with that stage. So it's what they called that letter that you get at the end after they've inspected the structure after construction.
So, yeah. Okay. So if this is the letter, I'm just trying to understand the process. If this is the letter you get after they've inspected the structure, then how do they do this up front when it says they must do this at the time of the building permit submittal? Does that align?
The way we're doing it now, without that piece of it, the process has actually worked kind of nice with the Axle Tree building as a kind of test dry run for how this is working. So what they were able to provide during the development review process, which is what they're doing concurrently with their building permit, is they're providing the documentation that they're in. They've hired a third-party reviewer, which is what you do to achieve the certification, and they've provided at the development review phase a letter from that third-party reviewer that confirms the points that they're on track to receive the points based on the construction documents that they have. So we move through with that. There's a second letter that they get, as an example, so that I can sign off on the building permit, so that because this third-party reviewer has basically certified that based on the construction documents and so on, that they will in fact achieve the points. And then finally there's the post-construction. So it's 3 phases. The ETO program aligns with that, with our development review phase as well.
Okay.
But at the land use process, they would be providing, as the Axle Tree project did at the time, kind of that score sheet that this is sort of, that they're showing that these are the things we're doing. It was preliminary, of course, because they hadn't really gotten into the construction documents, but that they're providing that, and we conditioned their approval upon achieving that certification. So we'd sort of run it that way with the, so there's the land use review, then the development review when they submit the building permits, and then this actual sign off for occupancy of the building.
Okay.
Counselor, our goal has been that staff doesn't have to become an expert in all these programs, that a piece of paper that is verified by the experts is actually our goal, just so that Vera doesn't have to become an expert in 6 different programs. And because these programs change, it means that we don't have to have staff with certifications of their own, that they are recertifying on a regular basis in order to be experts in that program.
I just wanted to make, that's totally fine. And I just wanted to make sure that it aligned from a timing standpoint, that they don't get in some sort of bind where they can't do this because they're waiting for that, and they can't do that until they get that.
No.
So what if we just went with the path, the Energy Trust of Oregon, and then if somebody wants LEED, because it's the thing, it's the title, it's the fancy plaque you put on the front of the building, is there somebody who could then assess the equivalence of, or would Energy Trust even assess the equivalence of what they did to achieve LEED without officially going through the Energy Trust process or something?
I think if we only required the ETO certification, I'll call it, for our incentive, then that's what we're doing to get the extra floor or whatever. If someone wants to go through the LEED process because they want the plaque and so on, they can certainly do that. It wouldn't affect our process. ETO would not be involved in, a LEED certification. That's not what they do. I
guess I'm just trying to figure out if there's a way that the developer could, get the LEED and still meet our qualification without paying the whatever other expenses there might be to get, or to have the equivalency of, I don't know.
So
I don't understand.
It costs you money to get LEED certified.
Right.
Beyond the things you have to do to the building. You actually have to pay them to certify it.
Right.
Whereas Path Net Zero is the opposite.
Yeah.
They pay
You're
you
getting incentives.
to go through this process with them. And in the end, then they certify, yes, they met these standards that we...
So just to give people a sense for why it's the documentation associated with LEED, so it's actually going through, in each point, you have to document how you went through it. In some cases, that means that you have to prove that you went to the correct landfill with the correct waste and that it was sorted in the correct way. That is timely. It takes time. It takes money. So there's cost on both the architects for the design component to certify that they met the design component, but there's also costs on the construction company to prove that they then fulfilled all the obligations correctly. I think what I am hearing is there are programs that are more stringent. And if people only wanted to go through one documentation process and didn't want to go through ETO because they were going to massively overdo it, do we want to make them do both?
Right.
Or is there a way for them to get out of jail free? Right? And I don't know the answer to that, but I think it's a good question for us to look at if we have a majority of council interested in looking at it.
Yeah, I'm fine with that. If they're going to supersede Path Net Zero, I'm good.
We'll have that discussion then with ETO as well.
And they have capacity to do all development that's coming to Milwaukee?
I asked them that exact question.
Yeah.
In
This
fact,
question I was getting ready to ask.
it's almost word for word what I said in my question to them, and as well as expressing the concern to make sure that they have the incentive funding,
I was gonna
the
fund-
stream, to be able to do that as well. And they have assured us that yes, they have their funding stream
Where-
is such that they're able to do that.
Where's their funding stream come from?
The state.
What?
The state. So ETO is actually a segregated fund of the Public Utility Commission's rate scheduling. So they actually receive the energy efficiency money that you pay to PGE.
Okay.
And then they use that money to create these kinds of efficiencies. So it's quasi-utility, quasi-nonprofit, quasi everything.
They describe themselves as an independent nonprofit organization, but it's connected to Portland General Electric and the utility.
A dedicated
customers.
revenue stream, I suppose.
Exactly. Yeah.
All right. So we don't have concerns that, I just want to make sure that a developer is not waiting or can't even do it because something happens, I don't know, they close down or something, they can't do it.
Yeah.
I will say that from our experience, and I'm looking at Layla, but from my experience with ETO, they've been great. The process for the library actually has worked really well. They've been on board. They've come to our meetings. They care a lot about this being successful. If they give that kind of service to other partners, then I have zero concerns. It really has been a great partnership.
Okay.
At one point, we were having conversations about just setting the Architecture 2040 standards as that's the standard. If you build to that, you're good. But that apparently is it's hard for our team to validate that, right? There is no third-party thing that says you built to that standard.
The 2040.
So.
So it sounds like you have some questions for us to continue to look at. We also need to have some discussions with developers. I'd also like to make sure that our development team gets a chance to include some information back to this team for consideration by the Planning Commission and by you before you adopt anything. So Layla and Alma will be invited to make contributions to the staff report when this comes forward, both to the Planning Commission and to you.
Right. We'll be back for that.
We were planning on going back to Planning Commission for a work session at the next meeting.
Perfect.
But, again, we still haven't set until we do that, we probably won't be setting the hearing date until after that.
And I guess what I'm saying is I think it's probably worthwhile to have either Alma or Layla at the table to talk about what they have heard from developers, just to make sure that we're having a very robust conversation about any concerns the developers may have around this topic.
Okay. And while a very important aspect of this code package, it is but one. of many. So maybe we could shift over. So that was one that we definitely wanted to make sure that we got to in the last 15 minutes. And Councilor Beatty had some questions as well, and I want to make sure, and maybe the best way, because we don't have a ton of time, if councilors do have specific questions. I mean, I'll schedule another work session somehow and be able to continue this conversation and be able to do that, but maybe I could start with Councilor Beatty's questions since I had them in advance. Is that okay? Mm-hmm. Okay. Councilor, you had questions about, so one of the code amendments, the proposed amendments, has to do with banners being used as wall signs. Right now, our code does not specify what kind of wall sign, like what is it made of? Is it high quality material or anything like that? And so we're proposing to tweak that language to not allow banners to be used as your permanent wall sign. They are a temporary sign. They're a form of temporary sign. And it kind of aligns with the temporary sign section of the code as well. Our code right now just talks about temporary signs being removed within a reasonable period of time, quote, unquote. So we thought it might be helpful to actually put some kind of a period of time. We've suggested 3 months. Maybe it's something else, but without something, it kind of just allows folks to just continue to have a temporary banner, and that's just their wall sign forever.
Well, I was going to say, we had right here on Main Street, we had curves and different people who had banners both on Main Street and on the back side. Right. For a long time, and I remember asking about that at one point, and a planner who's no longer with the city, I thought, told me they could have them indefinitely. So you're saying no, they're actually temporary signs.
They're intended to be. Our code, though, never specifies that you couldn't use the banner as your actual wall sign. So you'd still need to get a permit. Temporary signs are exempt from a sign permit. That's kind of the idea, that they're sort of up there for a special event or something, and then they come down. But what we're suggesting is that when you submit for your actual wall sign, you can't use a banner as your wall sign. It needs to be something other than that.
Was there something specifically that drove this particular desire for a code change? Was there a complaint? Was there...
I think when we were talking with Alma as well, just sort of just the nature of what signage is looking like, how long does it stay up, like when a business closes. So there was sort of a link to a couple of these proposed sign code amendments. And I believe there were a couple of businesses that were sort of using banners as their de facto permanent sign. They just sort of stay there. And we'd like to have the code language, I think, to sort of require something a bit more permanent.
I understand that desire, but I also understand, I actually know from the aspect of one of those places that was doing that for a while at least. I haven't actually looked recently. It was Waldorf School. And the reason they did it was because when they said, "Hi, we want to put a permanent sign up on our building," they were told, "Oh, well, you'll have to go through historic review, and that's $3,000 in 6 months, and blah, blah, blah." And they went, "Okay, never mind. We won't do that."
Well, they do have a sign out by the street that is totally illegible. It doesn't tell, I mean, you have to be like up there on your feet close to it.
I agree.
So they have other sign options.
But to replace the old, where it used to say Milwaukee Middle School or whatever it said there, which was their intention, even to use the same font and everything.
Right.
They were told they had to go through an entire historic review and blah, blah, blah. And they were just like, okay, never mind.
The historic code is another chapter for us to...
We weren't trying to touch that one right now.
No, definitely not. No, that would be the next one. So I don't know if I've answered your question to satisfaction about that.
You answered my question about the banner as wall sign, and so you are saying that a banner is a temporary sign, and so under the revision would be subject to a 3-month maximum.
Right. I mean, and we don't,
As proposed.
and our existing code we don't specify what type of sign is a temporary sign. We're sort of talking about what events or under what circumstances might someone have a temporary sign. So we wouldn't be listing, banners are temporary signs. It's just anyone can make any kind of a temporary sign. It's really more about how long is it up there, what is it for, that kind of thing. And yes, the right now, the amendment is, 3 months for that reasonable period of time, but that's certainly...
In response to your questions today, we talked about the idea that there are certain types of real estate signs that might be up longer, so we might want to tweak that language a little bit to recognize that.
So that's...
Those aren't generally banners, though.
But it's any kind of a temporary sign.
Yeah, well, yeah.
That's what we meant. We're
talking about putting a 3-month limit on temporaries.
Right.
But so an A-frame sign, I would assume you don't consider an A-frame.
No, there's a permit for that. It's a different kind of, it's called out separately.
It's a different code.
Yeah. No.
It's not temporary, it's permanent.
It's not.
It's not temporary.
Well, we have a permit for sidewalk signs, the A-frames, and they have to meet certain requirements. We tell them where they can be, because usually they're out on the sidewalk and in the right of way, so we have a separate process for those. Yeah, typically because they're in the right of way. So,
where did the 3-month recommendation come from? Not an example from another city nearby, or?
No, and in looking, some of them don't have a time frame. Some of them do have 3 months. Some have they're sort of all over the map. So we kind of thought, well, we'll start with 3 months and see, when we do the posting and talk to folks and see is that in fact a reasonable period of time for what folks might need a temporary sign for.
It seems like if you're going to do it, temporary sign, it should be temporary. And so there should be some kind of...
Yeah, I like the 3 months myself.
Yeah.
And the, new businesses, that gives a new business some time to, get their stuff in order to build a permanent sign. The sports things that go on the fields that have banners, that's a sports season, that should cover them.
Didn't the farmers market at one point have a banner? And didn't they want to put a banner across McLaughlin?
Oh, yeah.
They were disallowed from doing so, but that would be up a heck of a lot longer than 3 months.
It wouldn't be up every day, though.
I wouldn't necessarily.
Something that would be
It was meant to be.
It was once upon a time.
That was the concept.
ODOT doesn't allow that anymore, so that's not really the city's issue. But
we may eventually own McLaughlin coming through Milwaukee.
We do.
Yeah, I actually have some concern about 3 months. I think that's a little bit short for I think it could be tied to something that's, maybe it's, especially if it's a, I love the idea of maybe, when storefronts are vacant for a really long time, and, years, a long time, the option of putting, of those kind of a little short-term sort of leases for pop-up stores that might be in existence for longer than 3 months.
Absolutely.
And so I think that there's some room there for legitimate reasons why someone would have a temporary sign as their permanent sign. And maybe it relates to some sort of a lease or something that
Today the code language talks about a reasonable time.
But then by whose definition?
That's right. So we wanted to put
it's been hard to enforce, right? Because there's no definition.
Yeah, I'm okay with coming up with some definition that's but I think 3 months is a little short when...
We'll take another look and come back maybe with some options to cover maybe certain circumstances too. It's a good idea.
I really like number 13. Requiring businesses are closed to put signs in the windows saying, we're closed, we're no longer in business. At the farmer's market, you can't believe how many people asked how come that Chinese restaurant in the corner wasn't open.
No.
That was the signs up there. It says they're open at such and so time. What's going on?
So the sign would need to be removed by whom? Because if a business has gone out of business and they just went away.
Then it would be the property owner.
Yeah. It should be whoever's taking the rest of the stuff out, take the signs out too.
There were a couple of things, and I know we only have a couple of minutes, so maybe I'll sort of jump to one of the items, Councilor Beatty, that you brought up that had to do with eliminating the step back from the development standards. The code right now for the downtown requires the 6-foot step back, right, if you're over a certain height. But the way the code is structured right now, that 6-foot step back is a development standard in the downtown section of the code, but it's also a design standard in the downtown design standard section of the code, and they're applied differently in an application. And so what we're proposing is that we would still have that standard, but we would keep it as a design standard. standard and allow for the downtown design guidelines to be the criteria upon which you would base your request to not meet that standard, for example.
Rather than the variance
criteria, because right now, as an example, the Axletree project was kind of in this situation with their project. They needed to, because they were proposing to not have that 6-foot step back, we were trying to address not doing that 6-foot step back with our variance criteria, which has to do with impacts and the kinds of criteria that don't really apply to a design or a massing standard. They don't really get to the heart of why we have that 6-foot step back in the first place. And you're absolutely right. There was a lot of discussion about it. I agree. But the design, having it as a design standard, if you don't want to meet that standard or you're proposing to not meet it, it's for a design reason. And you're using the downtown design guidelines as a way to make that argument about why we're achieving the purpose of the step back in a different way than the math, the calculation of the step back. It's difficult to apply two completely different kinds of criteria and standards to this particular aspect, and that's why we think it's in some ways a conflict in the code to have it in two different places that are handled so differently within the decision-making process.
I would agree with that. I'm not sure that I would necessarily agree with which way you've chosen to pick.
Well, so by making it, explain more about, by making it tested by the design standards, does that mean the DLC makes the decision?
The DLC makes a recommendation to the Planning Commission, but you're using the downtown design guidelines as your metric and your barometer for how you're...
Which we're in the process of revisiting.
Right.
Okay.
But those are those standards that you're using to judge the request to eliminate the step back.
In that process, we're sort of merging the design standards and the design guidelines. We're not keeping them as separate. What I should say is we're taking the things that are about building form out of the development standards and putting them in the design section. So this is one of those building form elements. And we're then lining up each of the standards directly with the design guidelines that affect them or correspond to them. So it's a bigger project than we initially anticipated, but it makes so much more sense. So we're proceeding in that way. And if somebody wanted to apply a variance to any of the standards, if something doesn't mesh correctly, they could still go through that process. If they don't like the designs, the standard, and they don't like the guideline process. But we found it awkward for that Axletree project to have to go through the variance process for that adjustment when the design guidelines were the ones that sort of talked about massing, talked about building form, talked about the roof.
It's a little hard for me to picture how that works, but I guess I'm less concerned. When I asked the question, I thought you were proposing to eliminate it, and I thought that was a bigger public outreach kind of discussion.
For the clear and objective path, you would still need to do that. Right. You know, if you're going to leave the clear and objective path, then you've got to go through a process. But for any clear and objective building, you need to do the step back.
Yeah.
Good. That was one I definitely wanted to talk about. And I have less than 1 minute, so maybe this is a good time to ask if there are any particular sections that you had questions about, and then I can, take a list, and I'll be coming back anyway. So, and it sounds like we need about a 10-hour work session.
We're going to need more time, obviously.
Yeah. We are definitely going to need more time, but
Absolutely.
Let's give her the list of things that we have issues on.
Can livestock be a pet? Because it seems to be defined as not being a pet, and then it says unless raised as a pet, livestock cannot do X, and I don't know how you can raise livestock as a pet if it's defined as never being a pet, or that.
Right, and I'll take another, the goal, and I'll make sure that the language does this, but obviously the clarification was that someone could have an animal that one might, or the code would currently consider livestock, like a goat. But that's not, it's actually a pet, because the standards for having something like that on your property are very, it's agricultural, horticultural standards. You have to have an acre of land. I mean, it's very different. And the idea was we wanted to, in fact, allow someone to have, well, you have to have 2 goats because they need to be paired, but 2 goats on your property and not be subject to those much larger lot standards.
Well, who wouldn't ever say it's my pet then?
Who would or who would not?
Well, who would? If
there's a gentleman in town that's in fact doing
allows me to do X and saying it's not, I don't get to do X, I'm going to tell you it's my pet. Whether I'm shearing it or not, I'm going to say, well, this is my pet.
But livestock in general is something that is producing some income for you in some way. So is the goat producing income? Are you leasing it out to eat stuff?
Yes, it could eat blackberries, absolutely, and it could still be your pet.
I don't have a strong opinion about it. I just want to clarify.
It's not clear.
Just
clarify goats.
Yeah,
clarify what a livestock. Well, it just seemed like to me it was inconsistent.
Yeah.
In marijuana odors, it says that we'll take into consideration the character of the neighborhood. And that sounded kind of hoity-toity to me, like the rich means one thing and the low-income neighborhood, it can be a different standard. And I didn't know what that meant by character of a neighborhood.
It was more about just industrial versus residential versus.
Right.
Yeah, so the zoning of the neighborhood?
Maybe that's I don't know the word character.
But that was one of my concerns. I don't want to let them off just because they're an industrial. They need to control their odors.
Yeah.
Boom.
And
But you might expect some level of odor in an industrial area where in the residential area you're not. I actually spent a little time thinking about this today even, again, as I've tried to research offensive odor regulation before. And Denver's done a lot of stuff related to this. And one of the things they require is a odor control plan with any manufacturing business, which is an interesting idea, but it moves you out of sort of a clear and objective path into some sort of review process for that odor control plan. There's a couple different ways we could get at it, and
it all kind of came down to defining offensive, and
we never found like a really satisfactory way of approaching it.
Right.
They have it in some composting standards as well. You'll find this kind of language. It's tricky, but anyway, there's offensive or whatever.
Right. Good. Okay.
That's my I also have a question about vacation rentals, but I can wait.
Okay.
So do they now know all the questions you have?
Yep, except the vacation rentals, but it's not important. I was just...
Yeah, I've got a concern on imposing a max of units on dead-end streets, so I'd like to have a conversation about that.
That's on my list,
too. I actually have a graphic to support that, so at the next work session, we'll
show that graphic. It might just...
If there are any, we are out of time.
Yes, exactly.
So if we have any other changes, if you guys could please email staff so that they can come prepared to speak to those items at the next meeting, that would be great.
Okay.
Yeah, I guess one quick thing is the number of chickens. I want to know where that number came from, because most people have like 10 or 12. Yeah, so
we aligned it with the county as a number to start with, but you're the third counselor to bring that up, so.
Yeah.
And as I pointed out over the phone, anytime we're matching the county's code, we're going backwards.
I wanted somewhere to start,
50,
so that's
50 seemed like a few too many, though.
It's good. Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
6 too low.
To be continued. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay.
Dinner is in the regular room, so it's over there right now.
So we're adjourning. And it is beginning to get really cold in here, so maybe
we can test the air conditioning control.
Scott just clarified it's actually in the back in the office areas to grab. You can, the conference room is empty though, so you can go in and eat in there.
Okay.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Okay. Hold on one second.